Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
We're here today with Dr. Craig Harper. So the reason, we really wanted to have you on today is you shared some statistics from your ongoing work in Tennessee that I think really resonated with people because of they paint a picture of brooding and nesting cover being severely limited across the landscape, but highly selected for, and the conditions that were being selected for conferred a significant increase in nest success. So I was kind of thinking that we could start with rehashing that, if you don't mind sharing that information, and then we can go into more about how common is that across the landscape and these common situations that hunters and land managers encounter, and more specifically the things that they can do to implement better brooding and nesting cover across their properties.
I think what you're getting at is I shared with you the county-wide data from those counties that we were working in or still are. And in particular, early succession and shrubland only represented about 7% of the counties, but nearly, I think it was mid 40 some percent of the nest, 45, 46% of the nest were in early succession and shrubland. And that was, very enlightening to see that type of selection. And of course, turkeys don't have to have that to nest successful. And all kinds of studies have been clear on that and shown that to be true. But it's pretty interesting to me that the hens, when they have some of these vegetation types available to them, they are seeking them out. Mm-hmm. And at least intuitively, you have to think that, perhaps this turkey knows better than I do about where she should nest, although success generally was a little higher in the early succession. I think in early succession, on average, our nest success has been 36%, and that's with hundreds of nests, and down as low as the single digits or even zero if the nest occurred in hay fields, in row crops, places like that where the cover was, exceptionally poor. But in woods, it's typically much more variable, but on average, our nest success in the woods is pretty good. I think it's in the high 20s, maybe up to 30 or something like that in some woods, not in all woods. But you think about how variable the understory structure is in woods, and also how relatively easy that is to manage or manipulate. And I say easy, and somebody who is on a lease block, of course, they would say, well, it's not easy for me at all because I can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so if you can't manipulate the canopy of the forest, then that's true. And if you can't burn, that's another limitation, et cetera. But all things being equal, if you are able to manage your woods, then you certainly can influence the structure that is available to either nesting or brooding. And so from that, we look at the structure that is typical at nest sites and at brood sites, and then try to mimic what we see being selected and what we see that might be more successful on both public lands management, where I may work with WMA managers, for example, and of course also on private land sites.
Well, Craig, I was just curious, and I know that I've looked for it in the literature and it's a little bit sparse, so I'm asking, I guess, more for you to draw from your experience. When you're working with landowners or managers on public lands or whatever, when you're seeing a landscape that you consider to be really high quality, where it's providing adequate nesting and brooding cover, can you describe to us kind of what does that look like? I'm assuming that it's probably more than 7% of the landscape, but do you mind walking us through what a property might, if somebody owns 100 acres or a couple hundred acres, what would they be trying to accomplish in general?
This is going to sound a little different from what I just said. Like, this doesn't mesh with what he just said, but I go back to that term Fred Guthrie used, which is slack. And so there's a broad range of structure, cover that turkeys can nest in or brood in and do well. And when I think what you're probably trying to get to is I should have 72% closed canopy hardwoods. I should have 18% shrub, and I can't do that. Because let's say, for example, you've managed your woods and you're in an area, maybe there's some topography and you've used the topography to manage the south slopes different from the north slopes. You've done a lot of canopy disturbance. You can use fire. You can take that wooded environment and have some areas that are closed canopy forest, but other areas where you might only have 30% sunlight coming in that canopy and you're burning it every 1 to 2 years. And you could have other areas where there may, for example, be 50% sunlight or 75% sunlight coming in and you're burning it more infrequently. And you can certainly see birds using those areas for nesting or brooding, just like they would use early successional areas. And I'll try to define at least how I believe those terms should be defined through the ecological literature. Early succession are those plants that are largely herbaceous and shade intolerant, need near to, if not full sunlight, and think of old field environments. And so I'm not talking about regenerating woody stems that are coming up after a harvest. That's not early successional vegetation. That's simply tree sprouts. But so you can get the same value for brooding or nesting in forested conditions as you can in early succession. Now, all things being equal, because of the food availability, and that may be through invertebrates, that may be through soft mast, various things. I think it's very important to have a variety of successional stages and a variety of vegetation types on a property that is managed specifically for turkeys. Turkeys are what we commonly call a generalist species, and so they don't have to have large tracts of forest. I mean, you can find them from south central Kansas all the way to the north woods of north central Pennsylvania and places in between. But where they have a good mixture of things, I think most people would agree that more typically than not, you can have good, robust populations because you have a variety of opportunities for nesting and brood rearing, summer foods and winter foods, roosting and loafing areas, and that provides you with more opportunities for management also. And so to kind of take the bait, if you will, I'll go ahead. And so I would not want less than, and this is just my personal opinion. I don't have, hard data to say you need this percentage of this vegetation type and this percentage of that. But I certainly would want a minimum of 10% of a property in early succession, and that might go upwards of 30 to 40%. There's lots of things that you can do and get out of early succession. You can manage them differently for more dense vegetation that might be attractive for nesting and not that large of blocks. And with increased disturbance more frequently, generally have better conditions for broods, but there's so many what ifs. I mean, the site on dry sites that don't need to be disturbed as frequently versus wet sites down in the bottoms, where if they're not disturbed literally every year, at least every other year, they're going to have trees that are 15 to 20 feet tall, sprouts that will grow that much in 1 year. And so your disturbance regime obviously has to match the site and the landscape that you're in, because obviously the soils, moisture regime, et cetera, because there's so much variation.
So go ahead, Will.
I was just going to say, so you talked a lot there, Craig, about disturbance regime. Would you say it's a fair statement to say that the problem with most properties that you encounter through a turkey management perspective is that they have little to no disturbance regime currently in place at the outset?
That's common, but most people who have property and they're trying to manage for turkeys or deer, for example, and those are the two obviously main species that landowners are managing for, they're implementing some kind of disturbance. A lot of them are, but the type of disturbance they're implementing, maybe, and we've covered this before, maybe they're going out there and mowing their fields in May and June. The disturbance that they're using might not be the best type, and it might not be the best timing. It might not be the best frequency for what to help increase productivity on their property and fill in the gaps for the limitation. A common one. Fields are good, right? That's what everybody thinks. Fields are good. Turkeys need fields. Turkeys are seen in fields commonly, but turkeys are seen commonly in woods also. But just because you have a field does not mean it's good brooding cover. If that field is dense and rank at ground level, it's not going to be used as much, especially in the interior, as it would be if that structure were better for broods. And so there are various management strategies, obviously burning being one and disking being one, that you can help reduce the clutter and density of vegetation, especially thatch at ground level, using, whether it's according to the circumstance, broadcast or spot spray herbicide applications to get rid of whether it's native or non-native, warm season or cool season grasses. I've said before many times, and I stand by it, unless you're a grassland obligate songbird in the eastern United States, you don't need more than 30% grass in fields to be more productive for the vast majority of these species that we're managing for. And that includes bobwhite. And for turkeys, I don't want a field chock full of grass. I want certainly more forbs. Think about broods and even adults, male groups that are loafing. You're not going to see them loafing in the middle of a field in the middle of summer when it's 92, 96 degrees outside. They're going to be searching for some shade and hanging out in the shade. And so having fields that have, it might be the scattered oak tree or hickory tree. It might be a clump of sumac or wild plum. It might be, whatever that is coming up out there. Having some scattered trees and shrubs is very good. And you can maintain that even if you're using fire, if you're using relatively low intensity fire, and you just let the fire move right through this. We do it all of the time, commonly, on many properties every year. Just because you have some trees out there doesn't mean the fire is going to kill them. And a lot of times you're having to use fire with a higher intensity to keep the tree cover knocked back. And of course, there's other ways of doing that. And selective herbicides is one, and mechanical methods as well. But meshing that structure with the life cycle is I think critical, and I think it also comes out in our data that the birds are selecting for that. You know, I think you asked at one time about nesting cover and the density and what it looks like at about a 2-foot height. Well, the density is oftentimes such that you can't see farther than maybe 10 to 20 yards, maybe not that much. And when you have that type of density, you think about what that looks like right now. You're in, essentially some woody stems, shrubs, regenerating trees, relatively tall grass, maybe some brambles, etc., an overgrown field. And you're trying to walk through that. Well, you're, having to scoot through the stems, and, you might have a briar picking at you here and there. Well, I don't think hens like that either. But that's where we see them selecting lots of times when that type of cover is available to them for their nest. But almost always, and lots of studies have shown this, that the nests are closer to an edge, a road, a trail than you would expect at random. And when you look at the average distances, that is almost always between maybe 20 to 40 yards, something like that. And so to me, as a manager, then I think, oh, so I don't need a 100-acre field for nesting. In fact, I'd rather cut that down such that it might not be more than 30 or 40 yards from the edge to the center. So, I mean, that you use that information to give you some direction for what scale you should be managing for with regard to nesting cover in this example. And then also for brooding cover. And that helps you, I think, decide how large of an area to manage for, let's say, with prescribed fire, or even if you're using a bush hog in late winter, how much do you need to mow, or how large of an area should you disc? That's helping you with your scale of management on the property.
Craig, before we turned on the recorder, you were talking about a field that is a relatively large field that you had broken up, similar to what you were just describing, and trying to connect it to a nesting field, I guess, to a brooding field. Is that right? Could you tell us about that?
That's an illustration from one of the WMAs that we've worked on, and we help lots of managers, and the WMA managers in Tennessee do a great job. They work very hard. They have a lot more land than they could possibly get to, and you got to pick and choose your battles to go at. And so we were looking at this one field. It was a large field, probably. Don't hold me to this. I think it was around 30 acres, somewhere in that neighborhood. And okay, what do we do with it? It's got all kinds of stuff growing up in it, all kinds of species, even calorie pear and stuff like that you don't want anyway. And looking at it, I thought, yeah, it's kind of what most people would call an overgrown mess, but I guarantee you there are turkey nests out here, or will be when turkey nesting season comes. And I said, your disturbance regime on this site to maintain turkey nesting cover, what I'm calling that at least, is every few years. You wouldn't necessarily disturb that every year because this structure is good. And so what if you just broke this up into 3 different sections, and you burn one of them each year on a rotation? You have a relatively wide fire break in between the 3 sections and all the way around the field. And then, there was a complex of fields in this area of the WMA. Then on this WMA, on this field over here that is adjacent, like with a wide hedgerow, and it might have been, a drainage in between or whatever to another field, manage this field more for broods.
Mm-hmm.
And, like in late January, February, whatever, go in and disc at least half of this field. Next year, disc the other half of it. And so your structure then at ground level is going to be very good for broods. Your structure in those fire breaks are going to be perfect for a hen to come out of, and the sections that we set up as the nesting blocks, if you will, they weren't any more than about 80 yards apart. As you know, I think a good arrangement. And so there the manager had in the center this relatively large field that he now is managing for nesting cover, and adjacent over here on this side is a field for brooding. Over here was a different situation. There was a lot of perennial plants, a lot of which were not desirable. There was Sericea lespedeza in there, and some other things. And so I gave him some herbicide recommendations and some pre-emergence herbicide recommendations, to as well as a post-emergence herbicide recommendation to take care of some of the undesirable plants, that if they're leafed out when he treated them, and to include those pre-emergence herbicide applications that would take care of some of those problem plants, and thus by default maintain more of an open structure at ground level. And so he had already sprayed the grass years ago. It had been planted to native warm season grass, the big blue stem, little blue stem, switchgrass, Indian grass, so thick nothing but an elephant or a cotton rat's going to be found in there. And so, okay, here's how you get rid of this mess. And, to have a few clumps of those is great and fine, but you don't want something that is just so dense with grass if you're looking for food plants and if you're looking for better brood cover, etc. And so he had taken care of that. It's all looking good. And then adjacent to all of that was a section of woods. And we went in and we thinned out a section of woods to allow about 30% sunlight to come in, and use prescribed fire in the woods. And Shazam, the broods are found in those areas. Turkeys are found nesting in those areas. And it really changed how that, the attractiveness of that area to turkeys for different portions of their life, not just for one. And of course, we left nearly all of the desirable oaks for fall foods. There's brambles around for soft mast. So anyway, that's one example of setting up what you might call a field complex, such that you're managing different sections in different ways for different reasons.
So did you see a sharp decline in the elephants? I'm kidding. You don't even need to respond.
Trying to get me to say things is going to get me in trouble.
Yeah, don't even respond. I'll just stop you there. Oh, man. Yeah, well, I think we get a lot of feedback, just as you do, with people, trying to envision what this looks like. What are they trying to accomplish? And, when I asked you about the composition, of a property, that's because people ask that all the time. And I think one take home of that is, if you're managing woods, that might decrease your dependence on fields. Not that you don't need any, but
that's right.
Depending on what your landscape context looks like and what you're doing in different places, it can change the arrangement of these different kinds of things. But also, like you just described there, where you're trying to create you're deliberately trying to create different vegetation composition and structure to achieve, different habitat components for the species, all in relative close proximity. I think that's really valuable for people to kind of think through that and then try to apply it to your own landscape. I think that's a great visualization.
Something else with the woods that I think is very important is consideration of your woods roads. Most people who have woods have some kind of trail or road system through them. And so managing those such that you have a preponderance of forbs along your road, instead of roads that are just, again, thick with grass, And I looked at this in the mountains of North Carolina, and those roads that were dominated by orchard grass, hardly used by the broods. Those roads that were dominated by clovers or by naturally occurring forbs coming out of the seed bank was one of the most sought after features that hens with broods would use. And so having enough sunlight coming into your woods roads, daylighting your woods roads, to provide at least enough sunlight to have good vegetation along the roads is important, but not necessarily so much sunlight to open everything up totally that you have an explosion of growth in the roads that makes it so thick that it might be undesirable structure for the broods. But again, don't overlook that. That is a strong feature for broods, and also managing those low areas that will oftentimes have more forbs than the drier areas. That's very good. Still allow a little sunlight into those by killing some undesirable trees and allowing a little more sunlight to filter in. That can really help the cover there. And then in more of the upland woods, as I mentioned, I really like somewhere in that neighborhood of 20 to 40% sunlight really creates a nice structure. And in general, we're talking about vegetation that is high enough that conceals the broods, but yet the hen can see over that. She likes to have good visibility. I think we can all agree on that, and not so much clutter underneath that's impeding the broods from moving around. And number one, you got to get them from an egg to the young broods, and young broods to older broods. And once they get to be older broods, they can handle more, rough structure out in fields that are more dense and rank and whatnot. But for those young poults, they're not navigating through some of that jungle that's present in these fields. And I just asked Joe Quayle, he's one of the graduate students on the Turkey Project, and we haven't finished all of this analysis. But in a majority of these fields that are early succession in the counties where we're working, most of them are rank fields, with the exception now of a few that we help the landowners in. But in those openings, that's where the broods are using around the edges. And as I've mentioned before, that causes a lot of people to think that, turkeys like to hang around edges. Well, I don't think they like to hang around edges. They just don't like to hang out in the middle of something that they can't hardly walk through, or where they're so exposed that they know the predation risk is increased. For example, if you've got to go into closed canopied woods, and some of these stands, you literally can see 200 to 300 yards through the woods with there's hardly any understory plants. And so obviously, if a hen with a brood is using there in that type of environment, she's terribly exposed. And then when she goes to the edge of the field, and here's all this, vegetation is so rank at ground level they can't even navigate through. Well, where do you think they're going to be? They're, just kind of moving along the edge, and that's exactly what we're seeing. Especially with the younger broods.
So even when you're tracking hens with the transmitter that have broods or transmitted broods, you have some of those as well, that you're basically seeing them. What you're saying is relegated to that edge between the rank fields and the woods with poor structure.
In my opinion, relegated is a perfect word.
Okay.
Good job, Marcus.
I'm going to count that one.
I would say the same thing for a bobwhite, and I would say the same thing for a cottontail rabbit.
Yeah.
If you think about it,
yeah.
If you're a rabbit or a bird hunter, and the first thing you do is put the dogs out around the edge of the field, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Oh, well, that's where the birds or the rabbits are found. Well, why? Why aren't they found out here in the middle of the field? See, if you manage the field correctly for birds or rabbits, then rabbits would be out there. They don't have to be at the edge.
Right. It's just a byproduct of the fact that the vegetation at the edge of those fields is usually shorter and less dense because they're competing with those trees that overhang the field for sunlight.
Mm.
Yes, the in the middle of the field, in old fields, these, and especially, and let's take a second here, especially these fields that previously were hay fields or pasture.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're dominated with grass.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you take a crop field, those animals are going to be next to the edge of the woods or whatever that's along the edge, because there's a lack of cover in the crop field.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, we have to, okay, it's a crop field. It's a working field. This field is not being managed for rabbits or birds. So of course they're going to be relegated to the edge. That's totally understandable. But what I'm saying is, if you have property and you're managing specifically for turkeys or for bobwhite or rabbits or whatever, deer included, and then you're seeing a propensity of use around the edges, you just identified a limitation.
Mm-hmm.
A limitation that's the interior of either of those vegetation types is not meeting the needs of those animals.
Mm.
So let's differentiate, working lands that are, agricultural lands for crop producers versus properties that are being managed for wildlife. That's a huge distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Not trying to, say farmers are managing their fields incorrectly. There are some things farmers can do, and of course, many of them implement practices such as field borders and that type of thing, which are hugely important.
Mm-hmm.
But big difference between the fields on ag lands versus properties that are specifically managed for wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things that our listeners keep requesting is very specific information on how to implement brooding cover. And I think, the answer to that question is very difficult to come up with because all situations are so site dependent and site specific. But can you give us a general concept of, or walk us through a scenario where you're managing an old field and you're starting out with an exotic warm season or exotic cool season pasture grass, and talk about how you would convert that and then maintain it over time for brooding and potentially nesting cover?
If it's a perennial cool season grass, such as tall fescue, orchard grass, timothy, brome, reed canary grass, of course, smooth brome if you're in the Midwest. We've all got our grass problems, but for those perennial cool season grasses, they are best controlled, best treated if sprayed in the fall. And it's at that time when they are actively photosynthesizing, sending nutrients to the root system in preparation for winter senescence. Although they're cool season grasses, those perennial grasses undergo a midwinter senescence. And you get a much better root kill on those grasses if you spray them in the fall. And so if you have an overgrown field with what I call a cool season grass base, tall fescue in the Mid-South is the main one, and going into the Northeast and even portions of the Midwest. And you've got lots of desirable forbs and other, warm season plants growing, then we simply wait until after a couple of frosts when most of those plants have either died or gone into senescence, but the cool season grass is still flourishing. We haven't gotten those hard freezes for the cool season grasses to go into senescence. And so then you can just use a broad spectrum herbicide such as glyphosate, 2 quarts per acre, and you'll smoke the cool season grasses. I mean, that's an excellent application. And if done correctly, it's best if you prepare the field prior to spraying. You don't want your herbicide being taken up by dead stems from other plants that have died or the previous year's growth, but you've prepared the field by haying or mowing it a couple of times. That's the most common. If you just mow it once, that probably not going to be real good because you're going to have all that thatch on the left side of the bush hog as you go down through the field. And so then you go up back about 3 weeks later and you mow it again. Then you quote clean that up, and then you just got neon green grass growing, according to your latitude and wherever you are, sometime from late September through early December. And you spray it then when it's about 8 to 10 inches in height, and you will have an excellent kill. And we have lots of data published where 5 years later, less than 2% coverage of perennial cool season grass. Now, if it's a warm season grass, and whether that be Bermuda grass or Bahia grass or native warm season grasses, then they're best sprayed in spring, early summer, just prior to bolting and sending out a flowering stem. And so the herbicides you would use are different. For Bahia grass, Escort is good. About a half an ounce to an ounce of Escort does an excellent job with Bahia grass. And don't throw tomatoes at me, but I don't know how it got started that Bahia grass was so good for turkeys.
Mhm.
But I remember reading about this in the late 80s and early 90s about, Bahia is so good. Well, I think it's because when you drive by a Bahia field, if there's turkeys out there, you can see them. And people are, there's some turkeys. They must like that. Well, I don't think that's true. I think they are overly exposed, and I know the food value of the other plants that you could have in place of Bahia are much greater than the nutritional value of the Bahia seed.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the structure of Bahia is not as dense and rough as tall fescue, and it's not as dense as if you got dense big blue stem or something like that, But no, that's your lowest hanging fruit as a land manager who cares anything about deer and turkeys, is to get rid of these unwanted grasses, and Bahia is right there on the top of that list along the coastal plain. Use some Escort, put 4 to 8 ounces of Plateau in there with it, and you're spraying it in mid-spring or so, and then you'll have nice residual control of some other species that might be problematic. Think crab grasses and various other things that will come in at that time of year, good for seedling Johnson grass and sand burr and other things that you would find down in that area of the country, and work with the seed bank and see what forbs you come in. Bermuda grass, typically you would use a Mazapir, such as 24 ounces of Arsenal AC. And, I'm not necessarily trying to give an herbicide advertisement here. There's generics, but, using the Mazapir is an excellent product for Bermuda grass. In my experience, and those that I have talked to and worked with extensively, throughout the coastal plain, there is no such thing as a single application of anything that is going to eradicate Bermuda grass. You're going to have to come back and spot spray some patches that come back and green back up by late summer. And for those, what we typically use is a 5% solution of glyphosate. And so I literally, and I do this for enjoyment, get on an open cab tractor in August, and I drive back through those fields and spot spray the green patches of Bermuda grass. And do you know what I have? Dead patches in the field. Do you know what's going to happen after it rains 2 more times? Something green is going to come up there because I didn't use a Mazapir again. See, if you spot spray those recurring patches of Bermuda grass with a Mazapir again, then you're probably going to have dead patches for at least into the following summer, because that's going to have a strong residual activity in the soil. So we use glyphosate as the spot spray application. And then for native warm season grasses, and look, I have written manuals on native warm season grasses and lots of publications. I'm not a native grass hater, but I just don't want a field full of grass. You can do the measurements for the food and everything else, and it's just not what you want. And so a couple of quarts of glyphosate in May. You can use Arsenal, that does very well to reduce coverage of native warm season grasses. I have publications where I can show you the coverage of whether it be tall fescue or Bermuda grass or native warm season grasses the year after and 2 years after you use these different herbicides and at different rates.
Mm-hmm.
You can pick and choose which coverage you want. I can tell you if you use a quart of glyphosate, how much big blue stem and Indian grass you're going to have next year versus if you use 2 quarts. And so all of that is known, and that's available online. People can go and download it and look at it for free, or they can purchase a hard copy, whatever they want. I'm not trying to halt publications. That all goes to the university to help reprint publications. So all of that is known. And once you get that grass base controlled, then, and I've had multiple graduate students look at this, Wade Jafellers and Bonner Powell most recently did an excellent job of evaluating how to manage the seed bank after you get rid of this grass carpet. And we go through recipes, step 1 through whatever, and it might take, expect it, at least 1 or 2 years, maybe 3 years of spot spraying some undesirable plants that pop out of the seed bank and leaving the desirable plants. And Mother Nature will help those desirable plants spread, and also over time you will see more plants coming out of the seed bank. And it's so common for somebody to spray a grass base, and then that first year you get an immediate flush of something like horseweed. My gosh, Craig, the field is just covered in horseweed. That's all I have. Well, for a lot of species, the structure under that is not bad.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if you're deer hunting, you're going to see deer out using in that field even in the fall. Now that's going to get eventually too tall for turkey broods. And so when that happens, I will go back in and I will try to manage the height and the structure. I don't spray the whole field, but I'll do some spot spraying such that I'm keeping that overall structure and height down low. Now, right there, stop. Think about if you're a WMA manager and you literally have 20,000 acres to manage. You're going to look at what I just told you as overwhelming because you've got so many fields to manage. But I know there's a lot of large private landowners, you know, they might have, 5 or 8,000 acres or whatever, but usually they have technicians to help do all of this work. Many times, in my opinion, it is simply changing what you do. It's not more work.
Mm-hmm.
It's just work. And so instead of going out and mowing the fields, you might be doing some spot spraying instead. And you can have a strong influence on the structure of those fields by what you do, whether that's spot spraying or mowing or going in and disking and how much you're doing. But you can manage those to maintain structure that is desirable. But don't let them grow up into woolly thickets if you're looking to have broods continue to use them through the summer.
So in that scenario, are you using herbicide repeatedly over a several year period to maintain that structure and species composition, or are you throwing in fire and disking with that too? How do they factor in?
All right. So after you get rid of the grass cover, you've that's a broadcast application. You've essentially killed a majority of what's in the field. All right. That next year, the preponderance of the plants that are going to respond from the seed bank are going to be annuals. And those species are going to change according to, to where you are. It's not going to be the same in the low country of South Carolina as it is in the Ozarks of Arkansas. Okay. So, your plant composition is going to change, but most of those plants that are responding in that first year are going to be annuals. So expect that. Learn what the annuals are in your area. Get a plant ID guide or, a phone app and, learn what the dominant plants in the field are. and how they may be desirable or not desirable for turkeys or other species. And then for those undesirable plants, on average, dead serious here, we will go into those fields once per year. June is a good month to do so. Like late May into through June, and just drive through the field, whether that be with an ATV or an open cab tractor, and spot spray the plants that are coming up that you've noticed that, oh, I don't want this getting started in here, and then leave. Don't mow, don't broadcast spray again. You've already taken care of that. Now you're just spot spraying. All right. So where you spot spray with glyphosate, and I use glyphosate almost always in most situations instead of a selective, because even if I'm spraying something that is a problematic forb, I want to kill whatever is around it. If I use a broadleaf selective, then I'm leaving the grass, and within 3 years, you will be taken over by grass.
Mm-hmm.
And so I use glyphosate, and that creates dead spots. And then glyphosate is like, an equal opportunity germinator. Whatever's in the seed back then can germinate and come on out. You're not smothering it by grass that you've left behind. And so you get these patches of more annuals coming up, but the following year where you did not spot spray, you're going to have more perennials coming in. And so by year 3, this is very typical, not always, but this is very typical. By year 3, you're going in your one time a year and you're spot spraying, and you're not seeing that much that you want to get rid of. And you're noticing a preponderance of desirable species. There are exceptions, but this is what's most typical. And then after that 3rd year of doing your spot spraying, because you've got some areas that are coming in with perennial species, and that may be perennial grass such as broom sedge or little blue stem, desirable grasses. You just don't want a field full of it. It might be some brambles. It might be goldenrod. It might be desmodiums. It might be, a lot of different things. Well, by then, and it might be, and according to where the site is, of course, it can be some trees coming in clearly by year 3. But in your spot spraying, you're also spraying those clumps of trees that are coming up that you don't want. And so then after that 3rd season, it's very typical then that we will run a fire through the field to burn the whole thing. Now, according to how much woody stuff there is out there and how much I want, I can go into the field and I can burn rings around the woody stuff where I've got a low intensity fire. I'm not even top killing that. I'm letting the fire come out, and I can manage my fire either by backing or flanking or spotting, such that I'm varying the intensity across the field, and I'm strongly influencing the plant composition then, and obviously the resulting structure the following summer when I'm allowing or not allowing various woody species to come in. Did I go around my elbow to get to my thumb?
No, that was actually have never heard you talk about that strategy, and I was eating it up.
Yeah, I was just soaking it in.
I have nothing to gain from this, okay? I can tell you this. If you start managing your fields in that way, you will never go back. You will never go back to dragging a bush hog all around the field all the time. No more of that. The productivity and the excitement of the hunting around those fields, whether that's deer or turkeys, will be so great. Why did I not do this years ago? It's just, I'm telling you, it just seems, I think, so foreign to most people that, they look at me like I'm from Mars when I talk about it. But you are directly manipulating the plant composition and the plant structure.
Yeah, well, I'm guilty of getting trapped in the burning mindset, really, I think, because, I think about eradicating those exotic warm season or cool season grasses, and then immediately I've got to get fire in there to start managing this system. And the reason for that is because you're always worried about succession occurring and it turning into a young forest dominated by woody species, right? You've lost that herbaceous vegetation, in particular the forbs that are so valuable for brooding cover in particular. But you're accomplishing that same thing in a more targeted fashion using the technique that you're describing.
Well, and when you just use fire, what you end up with typically is, and even if you're, and especially if you're using relatively frequent fire on most sites on a 1 to 2 year interval, that means you're burning every year or every 2 years. And most people are going to be doing their burning in February, March. And within several years, what they notice is they got a field full of grass.
Right.
And you are strongly promoting native warm season grasses by burning frequently at that time. And you're also promoting woody sprouting. And so if you're burning in the dormant season or in the early portion of the growing season, you can pretty much count on every one of those woody sprouts to pop back out. And so by moving your burning later into the growing season, that might be June in some latitudes, July, August, September, then in general, you are encouraging a stronger composition of forbs and not favoring grasses as heavily. However, that being said, by continually using fire as your only method of disturbance, you're going to have a preponderance of perennial plants, perennial grasses, perennial forbs, brambles, and trees, tree sprouts coming up in the field. If you want more annual species, then you need to disturb the dirt a little bit. And so to reduce, and it might be goldenrod. It might be, lots of different things. Certainly brambles. I don't want a field just chock full of blackberry all the way across the field. But when you start to see that after you burn, because when you burn, of course, the biomass, at least most of it, is reduced, and it makes disking easy. I like to then wait after a rain or two to keep all the soot off of me, off the tractor and everything else, and then lightly disc the field, and that will encourage more forbs to come up, and you won't have as strong of a propensity, it won't be dominated just by perennial plants, but you'll have more annual plants coming in as well. So you're using all of these things in your early succession management: fire, herbicides, maybe a broadcast to begin with to get rid of a widespread problem plant, spot spray applications afterwards, as well as disking.
So if I'm a landowner in New York and I can't burn, how long could I potentially manage a field for brooding cover using just herbicides as you've described today, and maybe some soil disturbance every now and then?
Forever. I mean, if you, I'm being serious, Marcus. I mean,
Yeah.
I know. I just
they
like
do
the
it
way you
all the
said it.
time. I mean, they just don't burn that much up there. There's some restrictions that make it difficult.
Right.
But if you spot spray problem plants, and then even if you mow, I mean, I hate to say this, but mowing can have a place. Okay, I've spent a lot of time trying to get people off of the mower, but your timing of mowing is very important. If you're mowing in late winter, just prior to spring green up, you're not destroying that cover for the species that need that during that time, and so that's good. And you're setting things back where you got a full sunlight coming in, and especially if you are spot spraying problem plants, you're maintaining an early successional community. And obviously, you can mow around your shrubs and trees coming in that you want to keep, and for those that you don't want, mow them and do a little spot spraying. And if you're spot spraying the trees and shrubs, it's a lot of people ask me about this. When should I do that? It's good to let them leaf completely out, because they've got a relatively big root system. And the same thing is, for example, with the Bermuda grass and the Bahia and the big blue stem or whatever as we was talking about, when I was talking about spraying in May, you're letting as much leaf area get onto the plant before it's sending out a flowering stem. And you're spraying the woodies when they have full leaf out, because then you're getting more active ingredient down into the root system. If you spray perennial grasses, when they first sprout out, I mean, you might brown out that little sprout, but that's going to come back because you didn't get enough of the active ingredient of the herbicide to kill the root system. And so allowing those to come out and get, full coverage on a large leaf surface area is very important to increase the efficacy of your application.
Yeah, you and I just talked about that in the context of a landowner that I've been working with that ended up mulching a bunch of Chinese privet across his property. And then, we talked about the importance of letting that grow back before it's treated with herbicide so that you make sure you essentially enough of that herbicide reaches the roots to achieve a kill.
Well, Craig, another question that I get repeatedly, I wanted you to take a few minutes, if you would, to talk about is there are a lot of people that plant cool season food plots for deer, and they would like to have high use by turkeys in the spring, and then potentially even have some pretty good plots to brood in. Can you kind of walk us through what you would do in that situation if you're trying to maintain a solid cool season planting for deer and kind of balance that with the use for turkeys?
Yeah. I wrote a chapter on that.
I'd happen to know that. So
the easiest thing for most of the country, from southern Pennsylvania, southern Michigan, and south, in my opinion, is crimson clover with an awnless wheat, because the turkeys are going to eat those wheat seed heads with vigor. I mean, they will go in there and wear them out. And lots of other species are as well. Lots of species, songbirds included, and even squirrels. Anyway, and don't plant too much wheat. I don't like to use, in that example, no more than 40 pounds per acre. And if I'm really wanting to concentrate on turkey brooding areas, I might back that off to 30 pounds per acre. And then I would have my crimson clover rate at about 15 pounds per acre, pure live seed. And that will, if that is planted in late summer, early fall, that will give you an outstanding green plot through the fall and winter. The crimson clover will remain green and growing through the winter. The crimson clover, according to your latitude, is going to flower sometime in April, and farther north it might be into early May, but most often in April. And the wheat is going to bolt in May, and the wheat will mature and dry out typically in early June, and you will see broods in those fields. There are bugs all through there, and the hens will be eating the seed heads off of the wheat, and the male groups will be in there eating those wheat seed heads as well on into July. By the end of July, typically the wheat seed heads are totally gone. And so then what you're left with, because what you planted is dead, the wheat is dead and the crimson clover is dead. And so then you have all of these incoming plants from the seed bank. And most of those, usually you're going to have a great forb community coming in. You may have some various grasses, but regardless, because what you planted is dead, the sky is yours with regard to what you want to spray it with. If you've got some undesirable grass coming in, you can spray it with a grass selective herbicide such as clethodim. If it's a mixture of stuff, you could spray the whole plot with glyphosate if you wanted to. But the structure, because of the height of the wheat, is going to be very good for broods. And you've planted a legume, you've inserted some nitrogen into the soil, you will have good growth from the seed bank coming out, and those areas are strongly attractive. You could use oats, and the birds will eat the oat seed as well. If you're, above Tennessee, you'll need to get a cold, hardy variety of oats. You could include Berseem clover in that, or just use Berseem in the wheat or the oats instead of crimson, but Berseem is not going to reseed as well as crimson. Balanza and especially Arrowleaf tend to get tall enough that the structure might be problematic for broods. But if you don't add that much, that's fine. You'll have places, and it's almost like the deer and the turkeys and everything have just watered out places all through here where they're using, and then we see them using these plots regularly. I would not use ryegrass at all. The seed head of ryegrass is far inferior to wheat. It's going to be a problem to get rid of wherever you sow it. If I had a lot of ryegrass in areas and I wanted to get rid of that, I would just sow the annual clovers. I'd leave out the wheat or oats, and then I would spray clethodim in fall when the ryegrass starts coming up. Same if you've got problems with cheat or downy brome or Japanese brome, some of those other annual bromes that can be a real problem and quite dense at ground level. Just leave out the wheat and oats for a year or two and spray clethodim. There's an annual scenario. A perennial cool season scenario would be any of the perennial clovers, perennial white, of course, ladino, the intermediates. I love red clover, and turkeys do exceptionally well when red clover is in there in terms of them selecting the fields. Alfalfa, there's probably no other plant that attracts more leafhoppers and grasshoppers than alfalfa does, and chicory. You will find chicory leaves in turkey crops commonly. So if you wanted a perennial food plot that is going to be primarily productive from April through July, then I love any of those forages in various mixtures, the perennial white clovers and red clover and chicory and alfalfa. And then with regard to warm season food plots, I think probably the best value of some of those is actually because you've sprayed the area or disked with your planting, and then the following year with the fallow community that comes in. Of course, you can see turkeys eating soybeans and corn and grain sorghum and buckwheat. I don't have a problem with any of that, and that's fine. But I don't think, how do I say this? I don't think it's necessary. I think having fallow growth is as good, and it's not causing you the effort and expense of planting.
There was one species that was notably lacking from the list of those that you just went through. Yeah, that's it.
I love watching turkeys go into Chufa patches. That's a strong attractant, and you're going to pay a fair amount for the seed, but it's not that bad. A lot of times maybe $100 an acre or something. But yes, I would plant Chufa if I have the right soils. Mm-hmm. And I've worked with lots of landowners where they have, especially sandy loam soils that do real well for and the birds got to get down there to the tubers. Mm-hmm. Up where we are, we have some sandy areas here and there, but it's primarily clays, and then you just about have to disc it up mm-hmm. Upon maturity to get the birds in there. And look, I think it is great fun to plant stuff and attract wildlife and see them and shoot them. I think that's perfectly legitimate and fun. I just haven't found that I need to plant a Chufa patch to shoot turkey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well said.
Yeah, something that I've noticed after working with a few landowners that had quite a few Chufa patches, it seems they're all dealing with other nut sedge problems, and it just creates a real.
You really need to rotate that,
Mhm.
not plant it in the same plot. Certainly no more than 2 years in a row, and there's some issue. There's some issues with anything you plant,
Mhm.
but I've over the years found, for me, this is just for me, it's not worth the trouble.
Mhm.
I know a lot of people are calling me bad names right now. And
Well,
I'm all for you planting the Chufa
yeah.
patches. That's
Well,
fine.
the thing is, Craig, they can hear you, but you can't hear them, so they can go right on ahead. Yeah. Well, I think that was really great, and I appreciate you going through those. I guess a lot of the same principles that you were talking about with field management, they apply even in the food plot scenario where you may need to get in there with some pretty aggressive herbicide control of these problematics. I know for me right now it's really obvious, but there's just a sea of ryegrass everywhere you look on
Oh my gosh.
places.
Yes.
It's just unbelievable. So you still have to deal with problems like that in these food plots, but once you get them in pretty good shape, uh, you can manage them pretty effectively, it sounds like, for
Well,
a balance.
what I have found is that, of course, you can find a range of landowners, land managers who have different skill sets and are willing to put in different amounts of time, et cetera. And we can get as complicated as you want, buddy. But in general, what I just tried to do was give you the simplest approach and the most effective, simplest approach with crimson clover and awnless wheat. And if you can't find awnless wheat, just go to your seed. Well, get on your computer and type in whichever brand of wheat you might plant. You'll find products. Click on wheat. It'll have varieties, and then they'll have a spec sheet. And one of those headings will be it'll say either owned or bearded. And in general, about 30% of the varieties will be awnless or beardless. Choose those. I mean, why make it difficult? Crimson clover reseeds very well, and then you can treat the field however you want after the forages die, and then you either top sow or drill a little additional wheat or oats into it the next fall. Do that for, at least 4 or 5 years, and then rotate it into something else, or let it go fallow for a year or two and then go back. I mean, it's just I have called that the gold standard. It's too easy, it's too effective to try to find something.
Yeah. I've seen it personally. It's just amazing when you take these properties and working with landowners that have roadsides and food plots and odd areas and power lines and gas lines, old pastures, and you just spray those, cool season or warm season pasture grasses out and allow that vegetation to start to regrow. And a lot of times, like you said, it's not immediately desirable species, but man, the wildlife just respond to that so quickly. And I think part of it is just the increased structure, that comes immediately after killing those pasture grasses and then not mowing. You just see such a rapid response. And of course you shape that over time to improve it. But time and again, I just see, and have landowners call me and say, it's amazing how quickly the turkeys have responded.
Well, let's take it a step further. What were turkeys walking through and hanging out in, either for nesting, brooding, bugging, what have you, in 1703? It wasn't any of the quote improved pasture grasses.
Right.
Not
It wasn't a mowed area either.
Just those naturally occurring native plants. I mean, why make it difficult?
Yeah. Right.
And there were great big deer back then too.
It's amazing.
It's I have to throw that in. These forbs are so high in nutritional value for the deer. Don't overlook it. We can't get into deer. I understand.
Yeah, we're gonna have to call Bronson and get him to have you back on the show.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think we need to close with that. That's pretty strong.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it was a pleasure as always, Craig. We appreciate it. Look forward to having you on again.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody out there for listening. We really appreciate you.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.